The story is based on true events. This is the experience of Jury in 1970, northern Wisconsin. At that time, Jury was currently collecting crabs in the mangroves, which he did almost every afternoon. He didn't mind the exhaustion from his job. For him, it was better to work double shifts than to rely on a job with meager earnings. In their place back then, there were a lot of mangroves. When you entered the swamp, you would think it was a dense forest. There were many sea creatures you could benefit from, like large oysters, catfish, and crabs as big as your arm. Even though many people knew about the abundance of the mangroves, some still avoided them. Not everyone in their place had the courage to enter. According to Jury, during this year, a rumor was spreading about huts standing on the roots of the mangroves. People lived there, but they weren't ordinary. What gave his neighbors the chills was that these huts were only visible at night. During the day, only the people living there could be seen. Sometimes, you would encounter them while looking for crabs, and some would even approach you to talk. According to the fishermen who saw these creatures, they could balance on the narrow branches of the mangroves. They wouldn't leave you alone once they spotted you, as if they had a plan. The most puzzling thing was that no matter what you did, you couldn't leave the mangroves as long as they were with you. Because of such rumors, fear of the Wendigo quickly spread in their place. Everyone knew back then, said that Wendigo lived in the mangroves. The shamans also said the same, so some fishermen stopped going there. But despite the rumors, Jury continued to enter the mangroves. In his mind, changing his routine would be a setback for his family. He didn't want to fish at sea because it took a whole day to return to their place. For several months, he continued cautiously. To avoid harm, he only collected crabs from the edges. It didn't matter if they were small, as long as they had something to eat or, if lucky, something to sell. One afternoon, on a Friday, while Jury was resting, he had an argument with his wife because she didn't allow him to go to the mangroves. She said the shaman had personally asked her to stop him from collecting crabs. Their place was too dangerous back then because every night, the creatures failed to find victims. Besides the shaman's countermeasures in the houses, the people's caution at dusk made it difficult for the creatures. His wife added that to drive them away, they needed to heal the place. After hearing this, Jury couldn't help but get angry at the shamans because he felt they meddled in everything. He believed he wouldn't be harmed by the Wendigo because when he went to the mangroves, he carried long blades. He boasted to his wife that if the creatures dared to show up, they would get what they were looking for. They hadn't even finished their argument when he was forced to leave. As he walked away, he heard his wife say she would call the shamans to fetch him. He ignored what he heard so he could focus on collecting crabs. After half an hour of walking, Jury reached his destination. The tide was high, so he couldn't collect from the edges. He expected the big crabs to come out, so he entered the narrow paths of the mangroves to reach the edge. Even though the path was dense, he didn't mind because he thought he would catch a lot that day. After a few minutes of maneuvering, he reached a part where he saw a pool of water surrounded by mangroves. At the forefront, he saw crabs crawling on the exposed roots. They were almost twice the size of his arm, so he didn't think about the approaching dusk. As he worked, the surroundings gradually darkened. Soon, as he realized he could no longer see well, he felt fear and worry. As his feelings intensified, he could only hear the faint sound of the waves. When he was about to leave, he stopped hearing the rustling of the mangrove branches. He knew it wasn't ordinary because there was no strong wind. Because of this, Jury quickly packed his things to go home. He carried a sack of crabs while navigating the narrow paths of the mangroves. When he passed that place, he encountered narrower paths, which he couldn't help but wonder about. He expected to see the riverbank but was wrong. Despite the many questions in his mind, he continued walking until he reached the edge of the mangroves. Upon emerging from the water, he saw 5 small huts he had never seen before. Each had small torches, indicating inhabitants. Soon, he saw the residents come out, watching him. As they approached, he saw children crying as if they hadn't eaten for days. Before the creatures could speak, Jury decided to speak first. He thought if he faced the Wendigo, they wouldn't easily defeat him if he spoke first. "Where's the way out?" "I've been going in circles and can't find the river," Jury asked his strange hosts. After hearing his question, one of them pointed to the path he had come from. When he looked, he was shocked to see the creatures vanish like a bubble. Because of this, he dropped the sack of crabs to run faster. Returning to the mangroves, he quickly navigated the narrow paths while staying alert. After a few minutes, his fear intensified when he heard loud screams and growls around him. It was accompanied by the rustling of mangrove branches as if a giant creature was flying above. Because of this, Jury chose to walk through the densest parts of the mangroves to avoid being snatched. Soon, upon reaching the riverbank, he saw the calm flow of water. He felt nothing in the area, as if the creatures had stopped bothering him. Jury thought he had to move carefully because there was no place to hide. As he walked, he only heard the insects chirping. When he saw a coconut tree at the edge of the river, he quickly approached it and ran away. He only brought back the blade because he left all his gear behind. Before we continue, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to stay updated with our future content. Thank you. Upon arriving home, he saw two shamans talking to his wife. When they saw him, they immediately approached, carefully watching the direction he came from. Inside, he slowly felt the deep wounds on his legs and back. "Where did you go earlier, Jury? We've been looking for you, but we couldn't find you. We only saw your footprints in the mangroves. By the way, did you hear our screams earlier?" One shaman asked. "Screams? Sorry, but I didn't hear anything. It's strange. If you saw my footprints, why didn't we meet?" he asked. Hearing this, the other shaman explained the possibility that he entered a baguette, usually used by the Wendigo when chasing victims. In the baguette, no matter where you go, the creatures will bring you back to their place. It's almost impossible for an ordinary person to escape such a situation, especially with the complex methods to counter it. The shaman added that he admired Jury because, despite being ignorant of secret teachings, he miraculously escaped a baguette. He emphasized this to him. Although he escaped the creatures, it didn't mean their confrontation was over. After explaining everything, the shaman took his blade to breathe life-giving words into it. When the shaman returned it, he advised him to always carry it. Never let it leave his side, especially since he didn't know when the Wendigo would attack. The shamans also fortified their home and treated his injuries. "Don't work for a week. Do this to speed up your recovery," the shaman reminded him. In the following days, Jury did nothing but rest with his children. Despite not working, he didn't worry about food because he had saved some. As his wounds gradually healed, he noticed visitors lingering around their house. He couldn't understand it, but he had a strong feeling they weren't just passers-by like his acquaintances. What worried him more was the frequent smell of blood around their home. Even though there were no animals being slaughtered nearby, they smelled blood. Sometimes, his wife would suddenly vomit without anyone causing it. On the fourth day of his rest, he noticed the presence of the visitors he had met in the mangroves. While they had only made their presence felt in the previous days, now they passed by their house openly. What was even more frightening were the signs they showed him, indicating threats. He hesitated to ask the shaman for help to know the intentions of these people. When the shamans learned about it, they told him to leave the Wendigo alone for now. Besides having a plan, Jury was part of achieving it. After learning about this, he decided to follow the shaman's advice. On the following Saturday morning, while drinking coffee in their yard, he saw a thin man waving at him. Because the sun hadn't set yet, he decided to approach him. Facing each other, Jury felt an overwhelming sense of dread from the man. He couldn't look into his eyes because whenever he did, he felt the world turning upside down. After a few minutes, he became more anxious when he heard the man's deep voice. While he spoke, Jury couldn't stop trembling. His shoulders also went numb, feeling like he had no strength to draw the blade from his waist. The intimidation only stopped when his wife shouted and quickly approached them. When the creature left, his wife pulled him back into their home. When his strength returned, he realized he had done nothing against the Wendigo. That night, after dinner, Jury felt a strange presence enveloping their house. It was followed by the faint howling of dogs nearby, a sign of impending danger. Because of this, he chose not to sleep to watch over his family. He stayed by the door to see the creatures more easily. As the night deepened, while Jury dozed off, he felt a strong wind above their house. When it disappeared, he heard a loud thud on their roof, followed by the foundation shaking. Peeking through a small crack, he saw 3 Wendigo crouched in front of their house, glaring with glowing eyes and drooling thick saliva. The fear overwhelmed him, not knowing what to do. He thought if he didn't confront them, they might repeatedly haunt their home until it affected his wife and children's minds. Jury didn't want that to happen because, for him, his family was his life. With a mix of fear and concern, he mustered the courage to step outside their home. He carried the blade and a whip soaked in vinegar for 2 days. When he opened the door, the Wendigo's faces showed undeniable hunger and anger at his audacity. Without a word, they attacked him together. As they pounced on him, he couldn't help but lean against their house's wall. While trying to fend off the Wendigo's attacks, he felt cuts on his legs and arms. According to him, it felt like being cut with a knife because of the creature's sharp claws. What puzzled him more was why he felt itchy instead of pain from his wounds. After a few minutes, when he had a chance to strike back, he quickly swung his blade at the creatures, but it was easily snatched from his hands. Realizing he was unarmed, he tried to intimidate the Wendigo while slowly retreating to the door. But before he could do anything, they dragged him outside the fence. All Jury could do was endure the pain to avoid waking his family. He hardly thought about his life, accepting he would die at the hands of the Wendigo. However, as they were about to take him to the mangroves, they were momentarily startled by an old man shout. When Jury saw the old man, he immediately recognized him and asked for help. After hearing his plea, the old man blew on his palms and threw it at the Wendigo, dragging him. Because of this, the creatures let go of him while growling. When they were far enough, the old man approached him, cursing. Soon, the creatures were terrified and left. When peace returned, he explained that their plan succeeded because of Jury's actions. According to the old man, while Jury fought, they killed every Wendigo family in the mangroves. They also burned their huts to ensure they had no place to return. The old man promised they wouldn't be disturbed by the creatures because, by morning, they would be far away, looking for a new place to establish their kind. Despite his severe injuries, Jury felt relieved by the old man's words. In the following days, the shamans did nothing but help him recover. They used all their healing methods, easing his suffering. When he returned to work, he saw some villagers going back to the mangroves to catch crabs. Despite his traumatic experience, he forced himself to return to the mangroves to continue his livelihood. After the shaman told him the Wendigo had left, he never felt anything strange in the surroundings again, especially when he escaped the bagot. But there wasn't a night that passed without remembering the terrifying Wendigo family in the mangroves. Before we end this story, I encourage you once again to subscribe and like this video. If you have any opinions about our story today, feel free to write them in the comments section below, and I will be happy to read them. Until our next story, thank you.